Sandra Johnson, and today we are introducing Lori Aletha. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you for agreeing to share your life experiences with us and telling us a little bit about your life. You have organized the Northwest Psychic Fair in the Puget Sound for about the last 38 years.
Right.
You're also a practicing and skilled intuitive in your own right. You've really had a strong and significant influence over this whole region as far as bringing psychic abilities and just the awareness that people have. And you've helped go through the point of rejection, acceptance, and we want to know a little bit about your experiences on that.
When I did the first psychic fair, it was in Queen Anne in Seattle for the Academy of Yoga. I went down to the Seattle Times to put an ad in and paid for the ad, and they wouldn't let me use the word psychic in the ad. And I said, well, it's not just a fair. They're going to expect popcorn and clowns or something, And they said, no, you can't use that word. And I said, you've got rape and robbery and murder and war. And I said, what is wrong with the word psychic? And no, it took 5 years before we were able to even use the word. Also true of the Bellevue American paper. In Bellevue, they wouldn't allow me to use the word, so you had to skirt around it. I've been interested in this line of work for ages, and I meet so many skilled people out there, and it's nice to be able to bring them all together so that they can offer their skills. I teach, and my main love is to do past life regression therapy. And the guides had showed me how to do it, so I was spirit guided for 8 years, and I finally became legal and got my license about 8 years later. And they also brought through information on inner child work to me 5 years before I ever heard of it out there. They said it would be very important work, and so I've really felt like that's, you're continuing to bring through whatever spirit says is now ready for it to be on the earth.
You also participate in various programs and activities and clubs and things of that nature too, don't you?
Well, to some degree. Actually, the fairs, and I just had my 15th great-grandchild recently, and so I have 12 grandchildren, and I have 4 children and 3 stepchildren, and so, yeah, everything keeps me busy.
Is there any time for retirement?
No. Why would you retire?
What were you like as a child? Did you have gifts or abilities then?
We moved out on the Mojave Desert in California when I was 3 years old. It was during the Depression. My father had done a lot of work for people around the area, and then because they were of the loss of money and income, they weren't able to pay him. And so we ended up homesteading in a little one-room shack out there on the desert. No water, no electricity, and we lived there for 10 years.
Right.
And but I remember I'd go out and play on the ladder and pretend I was on a sailing ship and, facing the storms and doing all that. I hadn't been to a movie. I couldn't read yet. We had all these different, not a lot of input like the kids today's life do. But I could remember being on the huge, tall ships, the sailing ships. And then when my grandfather would start up the Victrola, I would see the ball gown around my feet, and I'd dance around the room and felt like, oh yeah. And it seemed so important to just bring forth those memories. So when I started to school and asked other kids, what have you done before you came here? I only had one girl that would talk to me. The rest of them thought that was pretty crazy. I decided that, well, maybe it was, but I had one incident I never could let go of. And that was when I was 4. my grandfather brought in National Geographic from the library, and they were uncovering Pompeii at that time. And I remember looking at him and saying, "Oh, that's where the mountain blew up and we all died." And my grandfather looked at me and he said, "Well, a lot of people died, honey." He says, "Tell me about it." And he sat down with me and showed me the pictures. And I remember pointing at the picture of the mountain and saying, "That's Mount Vesuvius, that's the one that blew up." And so years later, when I was in doubt as to whether these were memories or not, I always went back. How at 4 years old, with no TV or hardly any radio or anything in my background, would I know the name of the mountain? And so I held on to that. When I was about 26, I got a hold of an Edgar Cayce book that talked about, he didn't believe in past life either when he was doing his work, and he finally came around about because of the work that he did. So that's why I still am very interested in our whole story. Life starts way, way back then. It continues in between lives and here and now. And so it's here. You know, it's all one life. Curiosity. I think curiosity is probably, I've been curious as a kid. I drove everybody crazy. Why this? Why that? Why something else? But I wanted to know. And years later, when I had my children, I thought, what can I truly give them that's going to be of benefit for them, as lasting? And I thought to help them develop their curiosity would probably serve them the best. As long as you want to know something, you're still out there, you're still doing it. And then, of course, at the fairs, I'm around so many nice people and like-minded people, and that adds to your energy as well.
As all of your psychic intuitive abilities is such a large part of your life, from when you were very young to today, how you would like people to know of them?
I think everybody has psychic abilities, and some will notice it more than others. And I really say, stay to your own truth. You know, don't let other people tease you and kid you out of something. If you know it, and hang on to that. I think it's really important to stay to your own authority. And you don't have to try and convince anybody out there. Continue to move forth and not be sidetracked. I wanted to mention what happened to me at Boeing years ago. Books I was reading had to sit on my drafting board, and so that I could read them at break time and lunchtime. And I worked in Auburn, and there was 176 men on the floor that took care of the machinery there, and I was in the schematic library in charge of that, but the only woman. And so when they would come in the morning, they would give me such an awful time about the books I was reading and call me a witch and all kinds of things, you know. And so, but during that year that I was there, they would sneak in by themselves later, and they would say, "I've never talked to anybody, but, you know, I've never told this before, but," and then they would tell me a ghost story or a time when they felt something, they'd been out of body, they'd been a number of different things that had happened to them. And then as they would walk out the room, they would say, "But don't tell those other turkeys." And the fellows that I knew fairly well, I said, "You know, if you turkeys had talked to each other, you'll find out that it's pretty common for everybody to have had some experience of some sort." So, fun time.
Who stood out in your journey of self-acceptance and discovery during the time that you were growing up and as an adult?
Because we were out there on the desert, it was pretty isolated out there. My mother had been raised Catholic. My father had been in a very strict Methodist family where they went to church 3 times a week, and they had both kind of had it up to here. I had a book about Jesus. I had some other information. I was always interested, but there wasn't a lot of other input. When I was 40 years old, I was already living here, and my father had retired and from California, and they moved up here, and I found out that he was clairvoyant. And I said, well, Dad, why didn't you tell me, And he said, because they'd called him crazy when he was little. And so he learned to shut up, and he didn't want me to go through that experience. And I said, well, I went to school blabbing about past lives, so they thought that was pretty crazy.
When do you feel that you started to truly accept who you are and your abilities?
I always was very open to them with just the feelings. There were hardly any books around years ago. And when I was 40, I went through a divorce that I didn't want, and I was heartbroken and still had 2 children to raise. I had 4 altogether, and the other 2 had already married, and just trying to stay stable so I could be a good mom to those kids really sent me on a search. And it was like, now I've got to push for it. And as I said, looking for books was difficult in those days. It's wonderful now. You go to the grocery store, you go to the drugstore. Went to Unity Church for a while. We had a marvelous minister there that was teaching about New Thought. And from there, I learned about Lois Mitchell, who was the first channel that I ever got acquainted with. And she brought through the Masters and Guides, and they had the Academy of Yoga in Queen Anne. And I lived in Issaquah, so I would make sure to have the gas so I could travel in and out and back and forth so I could attend their classes. It was more than yoga because one Thursday each week they taught the ancient wisdom teachings. And so I stayed with them for many years and finally became their director when they went to Hawaii, and I kept the place open for another 2 years after that as the director.
Is there a specific philosophy that you have today of your abilities or gifts?
Just always seeking more information and looking where you could find it, I think. So it was a general thing. It wasn't a real cutoff date. But as the children grew and got older, I had more time to pursue more things, and that helped. And because in the beginning, I remember saying, God, is this the only thing I'm here for, is to raise children? And some of the neighbor kids that were always coming in because they'd ran away from home, and my kids had said, well, you can come to Mom's house. And so we ended up with several kids around from time to time. But then I was able to really pursue the studies as I wished to.
Is it separate from a religion?
Very eclectic. Very, very eclectic. The Christianity, I've touched into Buddhism. I've studied shamanic studies for a number of years. I was with another lady that was an excellent channel, and she brought through an entity called Dawajiwa, who got a group of us together and taught us every month. And we did our we call it Wimpy Woman's Sweat Lodge. After the Vision Quest, I was given my name, which was Satachwajiwa, which means Rainbow Walker Woman. And interesting, as I do the regression therapy, the guides have brought in the rainbow for me to walk people through the rainbow on the way down. So it's always been a part of what I do. When I was so excited when I found out that all religions have basically got the golden rule, because it's a basis for each one of them. They don't all pay attention to it, but it is there, and it's something that's come through all the major religions in the world. And to me, to be eclectic and pull from wherever, I think the only true religion for anyone is the one that they gather and pull in for themselves.
Do you feel that you have a life mission?
Not particularly. It expands. It continues to expand. As I get more information, there's more things to do. I've been doing the past life regression therapy for about 38 years as well, and that is incredible what it comes up for people. If we bring forth fears or things that block us, there's ways to help release that, and the guides have said that when you can take yourself to a new level of consciousness, you can actually erase the karma. So that can be done. It's just fun to know what your personal history is. Also to know certain people in your life, who they were in other times, and what was that way that we interact with each other.
How has all of this impacted your perspective on the ups and downs of life?
If somebody doesn't have some sort of a belief system, even if it's much different than mine, I think it would be very difficult to do this earth life. I think it's important for us to have something that we believe in and something that leads us, and then it continues to expand. So, and all religions serve a purpose, because you learn what you need to learn, and maybe you'll stay there that whole lifetime, but maybe you'll also expand and pick up other information. And I think it's just a part of an evolutionary growth.
Okay. What would you want for someone today who's growing up with gifts?
Well, I think it's really important that people believe in themselves. There's so many people that I meet out there. They are psychic, they've got abilities, they've got feelings, they've got gut feelings, and it's important to pay attention to those and listen to them, because it's individual. And I've worked with many people that they were good enough to be psychic readers out there in the world, but they hold themselves back because of being burned at the stake or some other very horrible things that have happened to them in past lives. Once you can face that fear and say, that was then, this is now, and we're not doing that to people anymore, thank goodness, I think then it frees you to truly be more of who you are.
There are still quite a few factors out there that are very negative toward any kind of psychic abilities. What would you say to those individuals, like you were saying, that have held back?
Well, keep your own counsel. I think that's important. I think it's important for us to take time to sit quietly. I mean, learn to meditate, of course, is wonderful. Pray. Both of those are important. Learn to just center yourself and be still for a minute and ask yourself, what do I need to do now? And you'll get the feelings, you'll get answers, whether you're a long-time meditator or not. You'll start getting those urges and those feelings. And it's important to listen to them.
Do you think the children of today are the same or different than they were when you were a child?
I was 40 when I found out that he had been psychic his whole life. And he used a lot of his abilities, but he never spoke much about it. And so, it's throughout the centuries, people have had these abilities from time to time. But the children that are coming on the earth now, many of them are wide open. We have many terms for them, the indigos, the crystals, and now the rainbows. And they are very advanced little souls. And they each have their own journey that they need to go through. And I think it's nice that there's books and movies and tapes and things for them to explore and look into.
Okay. What would you recommend to parents who have these wide open children?
I've had people show up at the psychic fairs and bringing a little child with them, and one in particular, the child was seeing things that was frightening it. I think she was about 8 years old, and the father definitely wanted to get her to the medical doctor and the psychiatrist and go through all of that. And the mother said, no, I want to take her to this fair. He thought that was crazy. And so I was able to come in. I was able to help them find a reader that could show the child what it was she was seeing, explain to them. And she does wonderful now. And this has happened several times because, all we need to know is get more knowledge and more knowing.
What do you feel you perceive about life that you would like to share with others?
I think there's a lot of chaos in life right now going on our planet, and things that can frighten us a lot. But fear is, if you look at it and you get the knowledge and what to do, prepare yourself for what is, and the rest of it is enjoy. It's important that you get it into that level of enjoyment, because that's a vibration in itself. and you want to gather around with the people or the information that's going to help you feel that fulfillment and not get caught into panic and fear. We have it, but we're not just supposed to stay there.
What would you want to say to those who don't have gifts in their lives? What do you want them to understand?
Be open. I think to me it's like, we are continually shifting and sorting information. And if we are open to hear it, and don't be gullible and swallow every single thing as God speaking. It's not. But as you're open, it's like, oh, well, that's an idea. And I kind of like put it on the shelf for a little while. And then if I hear more information in that agrees with that, and you get 2 or 3 of those, and you feel like there must be some truth here to this. But, occasionally there's stuff that comes out, and you feel like, no, this is not. And I call it my BS detector. So, it's like, it's important for people to know, and you don't have to argue about it. Keep your own counsel and talk with those people that don't take you down.
What experience have you had that you would wish for everyone to have?
Basically to feel that it's okay to be you. I think that, we need to all remember, somebody said it so wonderfully well years ago. We are not bodies with a spiritual, we are spirits having a human experience. And if you go back to knowing that you are spirit, you've lived before, you've been in between lives, you're here again, and you're continuing to grow, I think that that could be very helpful for people. And I would love it if people understand that.
Lori, one other question. Do you feel that you have had a supernatural life or a human experience life?
Well, for years I like to always take the woo-woo out of the supernatural. To me it's like, they get scared, they go, oh, that's frightening, I don't want to look, I don't want to know or anything. To me, it's all natural at a super level. And that's human experience, that's life. And if we open ourselves to it, we get it all. You're here for a while, you're in the physical body for a while, but you've been here for thousands and thousands of years, and if you just get in touch with that part of yourself, that you are a spirit that is continually evolving, I think, you flow through it, and it makes it, even the challenges out there. When I remember one time being very upset because I had worked for 2 months for this person, and when it came time for them to pay me, that they were supposed to every 2 weeks, they left the country, and I was without any income or money to pay the rent. And I sat there and said, I didn't know how to handle it. It was a Friday night, and rent was due on Monday. And I finally did the Lord's Prayer, and I did it 3 times, and it said, and I remember it saying that, many things from the teachings where this too will pass, and it does, and I think that's important. But it also was saying, give us this day our daily bread. It didn't say anything about next week's bread or next month's bread, it just said our daily bread. So I went into feelings of gratitude for everything that I had, and I was looking at the pictures on the wall, and I still had a roof over my head, and I still had electricity was still on, and just gratitude. Years later, I found out that's a marvelous tool to use. But after 9 o'clock, I had a stranger call me and said, "Our architect has been in an accident. We heard that you could maybe help us." I had no information out there saying that I was doing architecture, although I had been for a number of years. And how they found me, we never know. But I was able to work all weekend and get it to them, and I had money to pay the rent on Monday. It was one of those wonderful miracles that just happened. And I think it's keep the faith.
Okay. Lori, you should rightfully be proud of yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandra.
You have had such a wonderful impact on so many people throughout your life as a mentor and as a friend. And I believe, the way I see it, is that impact goes out like the ripples on a pond. And I think for many years to come, your footprint is still going to be there in the sand and guiding the rest of us.
Oh, thank you, Sandra.
So thank you for all that you do.
Oh, you bet. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here. And it's been wonderful. And as the fairs expand and new people come in, we've had some marvelous people that have come into my life just because I want to promote them. I want to let everybody know who's out there. There's lots of wonderful people out there.